Now to the war in Ukraine and a city in the middle of harm's way. Civilians in Nikopol face regular bombardment and drone attacks even as they try to lead a somewhat normal life. Nikopol sits on a reservoir just opposite a Russian army stronghold. And it's close to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, now under Russian control. It was once a thriving industrial hub in southern Ukraine, but its population has now halved in size.
In Nikopol, a Ukrainian city just 5 kilometers from the Russian-occupied territories, drone and mortar attacks have become part of daily life. But despite the danger, this team of engineers goes to work every day to repair local power lines damaged by shelling.
The area is a little dangerous. A lot of drones fly by. We've almost been hit more than once.
Is it important to move fast?
Preferably.
They're heading to an area on the coast of the Dnipro River. The opposite bank, occupied by Russia, is in full view. They're met by local resident Lyudmila. She looks after the houses on her street now that most of her neighbours have fled. But there's almost no house left intact here. The closer to the shore, the greater the level of destruction.
This was one of the rooms here. It was very close to the edge, just one small step away from the water. Oh, it's starting.
Is it coming this way?
Let's go, quickly.
As often happens, work on the power lines is interrupted by the nearby drone attacks.
It feels like you're sitting and waiting for it to hit you.
No, you're praying to God for it not to hit you.
As the immediate threat dissipates, the engineers return to work. Locals here have been without electricity for a third day. And after a short while, the lights switch back on.
It is working again. Oh, thanks.
It's nice to give people light. And if we don't do it, who will?
Lyudmila says she's become used to the sounds of explosions. Her own backyard has been hit 6 times in 2 years.
It's scary, scary. But this is home. I'm my own boss here. I don't want any help. I just want there to be peace as soon as possible. What can I say?
But as the attacks from across the water keep coming, the prospect of peace seems a long way off.
Our correspondent Nick Connolly is in Kyiv and joins us now. Nick, Russia has relentlessly targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure. What are the chances that Ukraine will be able to keep the lights and heat on this winter?
Well, Terry, that is the big worry here. As temperatures fall, it is suddenly feeling pretty chilly here in Kyiv, especially overnight. And there are, by different estimates, about deficits of about a third of the power that this country needs in the winter season. That's because Russia has destroyed an estimated 3/4 of Ukraine's non-nuclear capacity. So it still has 3 major nuclear plants left on government-controlled territory. Obviously, the big one there in Zaporizhzhia that we saw across the water in the report is under Russian control and not supplying Ukraine. So there are lots of fears that people are going to be asked to basically use a minimum to join forces, move into each other's apartments rather than trying to heat too large an area, and that people are basically going to have to kind of hunker down. As you saw in that report, the infrastructure has been remarkably resilient. Every time things get destroyed, within a couple of days, mostly the system stabilizes, power is not cut off for hours and hours at a time, and lines are put back. So for now, people have been doing better than they probably expected. And there's obviously that nuclear capacity, which for now Russia hasn't hit directly. But there is the potential, many people here fear, that Russia doesn't have to necessarily hit those nuclear power plants. It can just hit the transport grid and stop the power leaving those power stations and keeping this country going. So lots of worries here, and certainly a situation that is looking a lot more difficult than it did a year ago here in Kyiv.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky claims that North Korea has expanded its support for Russia and is now sending troops to the region. What more do we know about that, Nick?
So we had reports recently of 6 North Korean officers killed in a Ukrainian strike on Russian positions near Donetsk. We believe those officers were there to help the Russians to use North Korean supplied ballistic missiles that the Russians are now using. So far we haven't seen reports, credible reports of North Korean fighters in the trenches with the Russians, as it were, although there are intelligence reports that they are being trained. North Korean soldiers are being trained in Russia, so potentially we might see them there soon. You'll remember that Vladimir Putin travelled to North Korea. This is a partnership that is getting deeper by the month. And even in terms of artillery munitions, right? When you look at those huge shipments coming out of North Korea, lots of experts now saying that basically Russia wouldn't be able to carry on as it is without that North Korean support, that North Korea on its own is supplying Russia with more shells than all of the West is supplying Ukraine with. So this is certainly a factor that is really affecting the balance on the battlefields here, and one that people in Ukraine are pretty worried about and hoping that maybe South Korea will look at this and decide to send some military supplies this way to counterbalance that.
Nick, thank you so much. Our correspondent Nick Conley there in Kyiv.